Accountancy Learning, we provide you with either videos to watch, and these videos can come with some transcripts, or you might have a book to read. And the issue we have with things like videos and transcripts and books is that the words appear in a linear order. You just progress page by page through the information. But that's not how our brains work. Our brains are made up of a network of neurons, and they're not organized in a linear way. And therefore, the traditional way of studying by reading a book doesn't necessarily fit in with how we remember things.
The human brain contains more than 100 billion neurons. Just like a single ant could never build an anthill, a single neuron can't think or feel or remember. A neuron's power is a result of its connections to other neurons. Each neuron is connected to as many as 1,000 of its neighbors. These trillions of connections provide the playing field upon which the complex activity of the brain takes place. Each neuron can turn its neighbors on or off depending on the signal it sends. And the resulting stable patterns of neuron firing represents memories and images and thoughts.
So when we're studying for an exam, the risk that we face is that the knowledge we need for our exam could be all over our brain in the various neurons spread through our network. It can be more difficult to remember things if we can't organize all this information in a logical way. As we saw just now, that all these neurons are going to be connected with each other, and the way that we organize all this information will make it easier or more difficult to be able to remember things. So how can we make it more easy to store all this information in our brains? So before we start watching a video or reading a book or transcript, the first thing we should do is have a look at the headings and use these to set up some filing system inside our brains. So we just scan through, we can see we've got a heading there, double entry bookkeeping. And we can see we've got some questions, those aren't headings. And then we're going to look at 3 fundamental concepts. And we've got the separate entity concept, the accounting equation, the dual effect, and so on. So these headings are just setting up the various things that we're going to be looking at in more detail as we do our studying. So having looked at those headings, we can now, somewhere in our brain, we'll have a neuron, and attached to that is the idea of double entry bookkeeping. And then we've got another heading for which we've got some accounting concepts. And then we've got another heading for the accounting equation and the dual effect, and so on. And then when we start watching the video, we can then start to attach more bits of information under those headings. And because those headings are in our brains already, we're already trying to build up the neural network that's connecting all those various ideas to those initial headings. And that's how we're going to be able to recall this information more easily. Because in the exam, when we see a heading about the accounting equation, all the various bits of information linked with that will be close by in our neural network. Now, unfortunately, some of the paths between our neurons can be quite strong, and some of them can be quite weak, and perhaps they may break altogether, and that's when we can't remember anything. So we've also got to think about how we can strengthen the connections between our neurons. Imagine we wanted to go for a walk through a dense forest. And normally that would be quite difficult, but you can see on the picture here that there is a bit of a path going through that forest, and that path is now nicely established, and there's even some steps there that help us to walk through the forest. But initially it would have been quite difficult to walk through this forest before that path was built. So imagine you come to some virgin forest and you want to walk through it. You'd have to pull out your machete and cut your way through the forest so that you can get to wherever you wanted to go. Now, if you didn't come back to the forest for another year, it would be overgrown again. It would be difficult for you to walk through. And the same applies with our memories as well. If you built up a connection between your 2 neurons, but you don't travel that path for quite a while, the connection between them will be weak and may break. Now let's suppose, coming back to our forest, that you've hacked your way through with the machete and you've got a bit of a path there. If you come back on the next day, that path will still be there. It'll still be easy for you to walk through. And if you come back every day for a week, you will create quite a well-established path. So that even if you perhaps don't come back for a couple of weeks and you come back a bit later, that path will still be there because you were walking along it for every day for a week. And perhaps if you come back a month later, again, that path will still be there because it's well worn in. And the same applies for our memory as well, that if you study something, if you come back to it quite quickly afterwards, that you'll be building up the connections between your neurons and you'll be building up your memory. And if you look at something quite frequently to begin with, it will build quite a well-established path, and you will be able to build up a good way of storing that bit of knowledge. But if you look at something and then you don't look at it again for another month, then there's quite a good chance that you'll forget it. But once you've spent the time at the beginning really establishing the path in your neural network, it'll be much easier for you to be able to remember those bits of information later on, even if you do come back to it a couple of weeks later. So the key message for you to remember the things you need for your exam is to repeat things quite frequently to begin with. And then you perhaps, once you've looked at it a few times over the first couple of days, you might want to come back to it a week later, then perhaps a couple of weeks after that. But it really is important that you have lots of repetition quite frequently at the beginning when you're first studying something. There are probably some things that you know really, really well, and you don't even have to try to remember them. So for example, here is my daily commute. I start over here at the train station, and I follow this path, and I get to the office over here. When I first did this commute, it took me a while to work out which way to go, and sometimes I got a bit lost. But now that I've been doing it for a while, I know exactly which way to go, and I don't even have to think about it. And because the path in my brain is so well established, I don't have to really expend any effort to try and remember the way to go. Now you can also use something like this to help you with your exam memory as well. Let's suppose I want to remember the elements of financial statements. So we have our assets and income, we have our liabilities, we have equity and so on. So I want to be able to remember those. I'm just thinking about my commutes then. So I start off at the train station and I know how much money all these train companies make, and it makes me think of income. And the train station is on the right-hand side on my path, so I'm thinking of that's like a credit. It's on the right-hand side. And then as I progress along the path, I then get to this nice park, and it's a wonderful park, but I'm just wondering how much it must cost the council to maintain that. So I just think about all the expenses, and that's on the left side of my commute as I'm walking past it, so yeah, I'm thinking that's a debit. And then I carry on with my walk and get a little bit further, and then over here there's a nice museum. And that museum, what a great asset for the city having a museum. And that's on the left side as well. So I'm thinking about assets being on the debit side, on the left. And then as I progress a little bit further along my commute, I come over to here, and there's a big cathedral here. And that cathedral is sadly quite an expensive one to maintain, and it must be really, really expensive. And I know that at the moment it's a bit of a liability for the church to maintain that cathedral. And that's on the right-hand side of my commute. So that's on the credit side. And then I carry on walking, and I go past House of Fraser, and House of Fraser having a bit of trouble at the moment. Potentially maybe going through bankruptcy proceedings, and if it does get wound up, then it means that whatever money is left over after paying the liabilities will be paid on to the shareholders. And well, that's the definition of equity, isn't it? That's the residual interest in the business after paying liabilities. And that's on the right-hand side of my commute as well, so that's equity. And then I carry on and get to the office. So there's a well-established route that I follow every day, so I know that's really well-established in my memory. And because I think of all these various components of the financial statements along my route, then it helps me to remember those as well. So when you're studying, if you can link the thing that you're trying to study with something that you already know really, really well, and you associate those two things together, then that can help you to recall those facts when you're in the exam situation. You just have to imagine walking along your commute or do something that you do regularly, and all these various ideas that you're trying to study can pop into your mind as you imagine yourself going along that walk. So hopefully those are a couple good ideas that can help you with your studying. There are many more techniques you can use to improve your memory for exams, but we'll leave those for another time. Good luck with your studying.